Filipino-Canadian Rechie Valdez made history not once but twice in Canadian politics. In 2021, she became the first Filipino woman to become a Canadian Member of Parliament, and in July 2023, the first Filipino woman in the Canadian cabinet. The Canadian entrepreneur, television personality, and community advocate represents the riding, the equivalent of a legislative district, of Mississauga Streetsville as a Member of Parliament. Now Canada's Minister of Small Business, Minister Valdez takes on new challenges while proudly representing the Filipino presence in Canadian society. Hello, I'm Michelle Abad, and welcome to At Home sa Abroad, Rappler's one-stop show for everything related to the Filipino diaspora. Here we discuss topics important to Filipinos all over the world, from concerns and welfare of overseas Filipino workers to celebrating Pinoy success stories to reconnecting with cultural roots at iba pa. For today's episode, we have the honor of speaking to Minister Rechie Valdez to talk about her recent appointment, her roots as a Filipino Canadian, and what lies ahead. Minister Valdez, congratulations on your recent appointment and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Great. We appreciate it so much as well. So, before we go to your new role, I'd like to ask a little bit about your Filipino roots. So, can you tell me about your life growing up and when your family decided to move to Canada?
Yeah, so my story is quite wonderful because of my amazing parents. My parents met in the Philippines quite a while ago, in the late 70s, and they decided to move to Zambia, Africa, first, which is where my brother and I were born. And then in 1989, when I was 9 years old, they decided to then move to a second continent and move to Canada, which is where I've grown up since.
Mhm. What was it like to grow up in Canada? How has the experience been, and how has it changed throughout the years?
Other than being really cold, it was a really big transition for me because I grew up in Zambia, Africa for all my life, and living in Canada has been such a blessing because the abundancy of life here in Canada is quite terrific. I mean, if you work hard in this country, it's amazing. You can achieve the dreams that you want to pursue.
Mhm. And since you haven't had any experience of living in the Philippines, I am wondering, like, how did you gain a sense of pride over your ethnic roots?
That's a great question, and I get it quite often. And even though I wasn't born in the Philippines, my family and I, we traveled to the Philippines almost every other year when I grew up. So I was constantly going back home. And my parents are wonderful. They never let me eat McDonald's. They made me home cooked food, including adobo, sinigang, like all my favorite things. So I grew up eating Filipino food, but also the Filipino Zambian community that moved to Canada, they created a community here. And so I was constantly surrounded by family and the community. And of course, we were so proud to be able to celebrate our culture here in Canada as well. And that was amazing growing up.
That's interesting. So there's actually a Filipino Zambian group that migrated together. Would you say would it be like a significant group with you guys over there?
Yeah, there was, I think if I remember correctly, it was over 20 families that moved here between the span of the late 70s to 80s. And so we all grew up together, at least those who lived close to Mississauga.
Hmm. Okay. So we know that you only recently went into politics, right? So how did you build up to that? Like, what were your career and advocacies like, and why did you decide to enter public service?
I think that's a great question. First and foremost, I didn't grow up thinking, oh, yeah, like Michelle, I'm going to become a politician. That's not how it works. So after graduating here in at a Canadian university, right away I started my career in corporate banking. I did that career and worked up the corporate ladder for 15 years. And I actually decided to pursue my creative passion when my daughter turned 1. So I made her first birthday birthday cake when she was 1 years old. And that for me became the catalyst to explore something I had never experienced in the past, which was following my creative passion, being a baker. Was a self-taught baker. Started from one single cake, and then I became absolutely obsessed with it. And that for me was the start of my small business journey as an entrepreneur. And I grew a few businesses since then and was able to really so I worked full time as a banker, 9 to 5, put the kids to bed, and then went to the commercial kitchen to bake all of my orders for my customers and then delivered it over the weekend while grocery shopping with my family. But it's really the small business entrepreneur aspect where where I saw this amazing opportunity to meet others. So I met so many like-minded small business entrepreneurs like myself, and we together with them, it was really important for me. I saw the opportunity to build us as a community. We needed to support one another, and at the time, I put together lots of entrepreneurial events so that number one, we can grow. Two, support each other, and three, together become a larger community that are able to give back to others. That's actually what it ultimately inspired me to put my name on the ballot, because I said we need more representation. We need more women, BIPOC voices out there in politics. And that's what ultimately gave me the motivation to run.
Mhm. Let me just backtrack just a little bit. So you mentioned how you had your own 9 to 5, you had a corporate banking job, and then suddenly, after baking your daughter's cake, you decided that this was your passion that you wanted to pursue. Was that like a difficult transition? There was comfort, I assume, if correct me if I'm wrong, in your 9 to 5 job, and suddenly you're out here pursuing your dream. So, how was that transition like for you?
Oh yeah, it was definitely a huge transition. But the reason why I hustled with the 9 to 5 was when you're growing, any small business entrepreneur knows this. When you're putting yourself out there for the first time, it's really difficult to leap and just leave it all of a sudden. You can't. You need to grow and build your brand. You need to build a strong customer base. And it's only until the businesses grew to something that was sustainable was I able to let go of the busy 9 to 5 and the hustle. But for me, taking the risk and putting myself out there was so worth it. And I think for a lot of small business entrepreneurs, finding your passion, whatever it is, mine just happened to be baking, but I've met so many entrepreneurs who are driven by so many things that they believe in. And I think it's important for one knowing that you can take a risk and that you can multitask and that we are multifaceted people and it's totally okay to do that. But as soon as you're able to be comfortable to maybe focus, in my case, I really wanted to focus on my small business entrepreneurship. That is only the time when it was at a sustainable place where I was able to let go of, the comfort and cushy 9 to 5 job with benefits. And I was able to finally let go of that.
Mhm. All right, let's go back to your Filipino representation in the House of Commons. So, your victory as an MP ended a 17-year dry spell of a Filipino presence in the Canadian House of Commons. And the last was Ray Pagtakhan, who was also the first Filipino to be elected to the Canadian Parliament. So, how did it feel to reach such a milestone, especially coming from your background where you didn't actually dream to become a politician? And is there a substantial number of constituents who are Filipinos in your constituency?
Yeah, so to answer a few questions, let's start with Dr. Ray Pagtakan. So Dr. Ray Pagtakan was a phenomenal leader, and he also was a minister when he served in the House of Commons. I remember when I first started to campaign, Dr. Ray reached out to me, and I was so surprised because it's like, oh my gosh, it's Dr. Ray. Right away, I jumped on the call with him, and he had given me as much advice as he could at that time to help me during my campaign. So for me, Dr. Ray is so important to me because I consider him to be a mentor. And so the day that I won the campaign in September 2021, it was almost as if Dr. Ray had passed me his baton. And I can't even tell you the feeling that it felt like having that baton in my hands and knowing that, it was almost like he was passing it on to me, and I was taking on that responsibility from him. So I want to first thank him for all of his many, many years of service. And for me as a new politician, thanking him and those who were able to, stand up for us long time ago, I get to now continue that journey onwards.
Hmm. So, as a political neophyte, have you ever experienced being belittled or underestimated because of your gender or ethnicity?
I think anyone that's in a leadership role of any kind, actually, let alone politics, will agree that there is definitely, there is that, that judgment sometimes. And I know that when I first was elected, I can tell you that I was shocked, when I experienced some situations where, um, people were like surprised that I was a politician, someone that looked like me, or was walking around in the House of Commons. But I can tell you that's the reason why representation is really important. And that's why it's important for leaders, whether you're a Filipino or anyone from any diverse cultural ethnicity. It's important for us to step up in leadership roles, so that Canada, and particularly the House of Commons, can better reflect how diverse Canada actually is. And to answer your question before, I would say that, I have not too many Filipinos in my specific riding, but across this country now, we're close to 1 million strong.
Wow. Okay. But just to follow up a little bit on that, on my previous question, I was wondering, how you dealt with criticism, because I'm sure that perhaps there are comments that, especially now that you're in the cabinet now, people might say, "Oh, she's a diversity hire. She doesn't have that much experience." How would you do you respond to such criticisms?
Well, I can tell you, Michelle, I'm very proud to say that I have a tremendous amount of lived experience. And being a politician, it is my role to be able to advocate and be a voice for others. And because of my many lived experience, whether that's corporate banking, being a small business entrepreneur, being a mother of two, I have so many lived experiences that I can actually speak to it and be able to represent well, because I have many different hats and can speak to many of those different voices, even those of the Filipino community. So I'm very happy that I have the privilege and the honor to be able to do that every single day.
All right. So let's go to your oath taking back in July, and I'm pretty sure it was pretty memorable, and I would say even iconic for the people who watched it, including me, when I was assigned to cover and write that story about your appointment. So yours really stood out among the other cabinet members because of your Mabuhay greeting and the passion in your voice as you took your oath. So tell us about what went through your mind when you at that moment. Like, did you plan to say Mabuhay, and why did you make that choice?
I definitely didn't plan that whatsoever. For some context, I attend many events across the country, and I open a lot of my events with Mabuhay,
Mhm.
and I actually reinforced it a few times. I'm like Mabuhay, right? So and I think because I was so nervous, naturally being sworn in for the first time, it came out of me very naturally, because for me, it's a greeting to those out there that understand what's about to happen. And so naturally, it's something that I just said. But in terms of the emotions from that day, those who may not have seen, my husband and my two kids were right behind me. Like, they were watching and witnessing what was happening. And I knew that my parents and my family all across the country and even overseas were also watching in that same time. And for anyone, because the Filipino community understands this, a lot of us are immigrants who travel from the Philippines to many different parts of this world. And the amount of trials and tribulations that my parents went through and what they endured over the years since coming to Canada, I thought about the gravity of what this moment meant to everyone. And that's what made me really overcome with emotion. And it was just a very, very proud moment for my family.
Mhm. Tell us about that. Like, maybe give us a little bit more of the behind the scenes, since you already started it a little bit. Like, how was your family like that day? Like what were going through their minds? What were they saying to you? What did they say after? Since you were already like pretty some tears were rolling down your eyes. What was that like for them?
Well, I think it was overwhelming, number one, because, the whole experience, like being there at the Governor General's home, for those of you who watched, my family and I, we walked up to the Governor General's home and we were just in awe because I've never been there before. So taking the scenery of all that in, taking in, being able to be sworn in with the rest of the cabinet ministers who I look up to, those who I got sworn in with, I have watched them, I've admired all their work. And so knowing that I had a seat beside them was a really big deal for me. It meant that all the hard work that I was able to put in, because I always talk a lot about my parents' story, but I can't forget how hard I've worked in my career and all that I've done for the community here within Mississauga Streetsville, helping small businesses, helping those across the country because I have traveled in my role, and all the work that have been putting forward. It felt like, all the hard work that I've put in is now being also acknowledged. And I think that's also what added to the pride as well.
Mhm. Okay. What do you think is the role of small businesses in Canada? Like, why do you think it's important to support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. For those of you in the Philippines who are watching, the small businesses in Canada contribute to 40% of our economy. So basically, 90% of all Canadian businesses are small businesses and employ over 10 million hardworking Canadians. That is a significant contribution. And so for my role as the Minister of Business, I'm really hoping with my experience over the years being an entrepreneur, I get to help those businesses and continue to support them.
Mhm. What are some challenges that Canadian small businesses experience, and how do you plan to address these?
Yeah, so a lot of Canadian small businesses, I think it's very similar to the Philippines. We all have gone through such hard times during the pandemic. In Canada, in particular, I think it's very similar there. We were locked down for a very long time, and in some provinces, more so as well. And so, small businesses right now are going through the recovery. We're not some businesses are not even past that recovery, and we're continuing to be there. So our government had supported small businesses through the pandemic, and we will continue to be there to support small businesses and listen to what they need through this difficult time.
Hmm. Maybe let's go a little bit more into the subsector of Filipino small businesses. So I am curious, and I'm sure the Filipinos back here at home are wondering there are if there is a significant presence of Filipino small businesses in Canada. So, are there specific challenges that come with being an immigrant or a Canadian of foreign descent and owning a small business?
Yeah, for us specifically, for Filipinos, even when I started, I remember looking around going like, am I the only one? Right? At the time when I was running my small business, I would say it's very few, far and few in between. If I compare Filipinos to other like ethnic groups of the same number, I would say we're smaller in number. However, since that time, we've certainly grown more and more numbers, whether that's restaurant owners, so many different types of small businesses here in Canada. So the numbers are growing. But I feel like one of the barriers is just seeing that being an entrepreneur, being a Filipino Canadian, is something that you can do as a career choice. And I think that's a really tremendous thing. And I believe that what I'd love to be able to do is help support those, whether you're Filipino or from any ethnic group, and all Canadians, to support them and say you can choose to run a small business. You can pursue your dream. You can pursue your vision. And I, and along with our government, will continue to support the dreams of those small business entrepreneurs out there who are wanting to pursue that.
When I did a sweep of, like, I did look at your social media a bit, and I saw that a bunch of posts of you, featuring a lot of Filipinos restaurants and small businesses. Tell me about that. Like, why did you decide to use your platform to promote Filipino businesses?
That's a great question. And it goes back to what I said before. Filipinos here in Canada, they need to see what's possible. And what I'm trying to reinforce is show, even as I traveled across the country over the past 2 years, I want to show that if you are a Filipino Canadian and would like to open a small business, it's possible. And I love to share the journeys of Filipino Canadian small businesses. And so I use my platform to show what it's like and that you can do it. And again, in hopes that more people step up and more people choose a small business entrepreneurship as their career choice in the future. And I love to tell stories to show like you can do different things. It's not just one thing, because typically, like growing up for me anyways, if you came to Canada, you had like two choices, right? Be an engineer, be a nurse. Like for me, that was it. But I want to show that you can do many things. That includes being an entrepreneur.
Top of mind, do you have like any notable experience or story from a Filipino small business that you would like to share? Like, they had challenges at the beginning and now their business is flowing. Do you have any story like that you could share with us?
Yeah, there's too many stories. Like I no, literally in my head, I have many stories of small businesses. But I can tell you what the trend is. After meeting with many small businesses, there's always that same thing. They're nervous about opening their small business, but then they do it, and then it always takes like that first year, 2 years of like building their brand and having them get the reinforcement from their customer base to say, "Wow, we love your product. We love what you're doing." And over that first kind of like year or two hump, that's when I noticed that Filipino Canadian businesses, they kick up into the next gear once they've built their confidence and built their customer base. And for those who are able to kind of get past that initial hump, it's amazing what they've been able to do. And they've been recognized either from government, or they've been recognized in many different ways in their different industries, what they're capable of. And there's too many success stories. So for those of you who are listening, and I encourage you, even for those of you in the Philippines, I know there's many entrepreneurs who would love to pursue their dreams. I'm telling you, as a testament to myself, you can definitely do it. And you just have to really believe in yourself.
Mhm. Let's go back to the significance and the weight and the gravity of your appointment now as the first Filipino woman in the cabinet. So, what do you think your appointment says about how far the Filipino community has come in ingraining its presence in Canada? How does it feel to be representing Filipino Canadians in such a position?
With almost a million strong across Canada, I can say, first of all, it's about time that there's representation at the table, particularly one at the making table. First of all, I'm truly proud and honored that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, put his faith in me to be able to have a voice at cabinet. And so I want Filipino Canadians, as well as all Canadians, to know that I will continue to be a voice for you. And now, not just for Mississauga Streetsville and the amazing constituents that have supported me from day one, but now I can say that I can help all Canadian small businesses across this country from coast to coast to coast. And I'm really excited to get started and continue to do the good work.
Actually, I have just one last follow up question that's related to the last question, but also I want to relate it to what you said earlier about how Filipinos should believe that they can step up. So you did mention that it's about time that there's Filipino representation in the cabinet and in politics. Like, and with 1 million strong and that population only getting bigger and bigger, how come there isn't that much Filipino representation in Canadian politics? And what do you think can be done to, encourage more Filipinos to step up and really be involved in Canadian politics, and maybe not even politics, but just in general leadership roles in society?
Michelle, that is like the trend of our conversation this entire time that we've spent here. It's important for Filipinos, wherever you are in this world, to know that you can be a leader in whatever industry you decide to choose to believe in. How I feel that I think what's important to know is, one, knowing that you can do it. That's number one. Second is in like basically pursuing or taking a risk on yourself to go ahead and take the risk and the plunge to do it. And sometimes, as you heard from my story, I did like a miniature plunge. I hustled and I did a few things so that I could have the stability and the sustainability to do the thing that I love to do. But ultimately, once you've done that, surround yourself with the support, your support system that's going to help you get through those difficult times. Believe in yourself, have a strong support system to be there for you, and honestly, you can achieve anything.
All right. And I think we can end on that note. So thank you, Minister Valdez, for your time.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Again, you're tuned into At Home sa Abroad on Rappler. I'm Michelle Abad. Thank you for listening.